Most people believe that the Gospels were written by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. However, scholars have known for over a century that's almost certainly not true, and it matters more than you think. Let's do a quick breakdown. The four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, are anonymous documents. They don't name their authors anywhere in the original text. The names were later attached by church tradition in the 2nd century. Decades after they were written, we're talking around 70 to 100 CE for the Synoptics and around 90 to 100 CE for John. Here's the problem with eyewitness authorship. These texts were written in fluent literary Greek. Matthew and John, if they were real disciples, were Aramaic speakers with little to no formal education. That's just the historical reality. Bart Ehrman and virtually every mainstream New Testament scholar will tell you the literacy rates in 1st century Palestine make eyewitness authorship accounts unlikely. Mark is considered the earliest gospel, written around 70 CE, about 40 years after the crucifixion. Matthew and Luke both look to have used Mark as a source. And that's not just a fringe theory, that's Markan priority, the dominant scholarly consensus. Now, Paul's letters are actually the oldest texts in the New Testament, before any of the Gospels, starting around 50 CE. But here's where it gets interesting. Of the 13 letters attributed to Paul, scholars are really only confident about 7, and they're called the undisputed letters: Romans, 1st and 2nd Corinthians, Galatians, Philippians, 1st Thessalonians, and Philemon. The other 6 fall into 2 different categories of doubt. First, the disputed letters, Ephesians, Colossians, and 2nd Thessalonians. Style and theology don't match the undisputed 7, and many scholars tend to think they were written by followers of Paul after his death. Scholars call these Deutero-Pauline. Then there's the second category, 1st and 2nd Timothy, Titus, the pastoral epistles. These aren't just disputed. There's a near consensus among critical scholars that Paul did not write these. They were written after his death, probably early 2nd century, by someone writing in his name. And that was actually a common practice in the ancient world. It was called pseudoepigraphy, but it does mean we need to be careful about which Paul we're reading. In 1st and 2nd Peter, Peter was a fisherman. These letters are written in elevated, polished Greek rhetoric. 1 Peter especially reads like someone with serious rhetorical training. Most scholars don't think Peter wrote either of them. So why does any of this matter? If we can identify which texts come from which communities, which time periods, which theological agendas, then we can start asking a much more interesting question. What did Jesus actually say? And what got layered on top with their own theological needs? That's what this series is going to dig into, the historical Jesus. What scholars think he most likely actually taught versus what developed later afterward in the communities that formed around his memory. And spoiler, those are very different things.